Recently, it was announced that Colin Farrell is in talks to play the classic World War II era comic book character Sergeant Rock, who had one of the longest comic book runs in DC publishing history. And while he is a member of the DC Universe, he is not a superhero in the traditional sense. He is, however, the tough-as-nails leader of Easy Company in the European theater fighting the Axis powers. His history, like many comic book characters, has inconsistencies. He was first called The Rock in Our Army at War issue number 81, then referred to as Sergeant Rocky in issue number 82. But it is his appearance in issue number 83 from 1959 where he is officially called Sergeant Rock that is considered his first appearance with the name that would stick for decades to come. And although the character seemed to have survived throughout the years, having roles in larger DC story arcs, DC Universe Legacies, issue number 4, published in 2010, gave readers a definitive answer to the fate of this average, blue-collar man who sacrificed everything in service to his country. So let's take a look back at the Sergeant's first appearance and then his ultimate fate as James Gunn prepares to resurrect him for DC Studios' new slate of superhero films. But before we do, we'd appreciate it if you like, subscribe, comment, and share this video out. It really helps out the channel each and every week. Thank you. Now, let's get into it. Issue number 83 of Our Army at War begins with the story titled The Rock and the Wall. No matter where the fighting men of the United States are found, in foxholes up against machine gun fire, or dogfighting in the air, or fighting for supremacy on the seas, the stories of Easy Company always kept their spirits up and their morale high. And the one man in Easy Company who was talked about the most was its leader. It's Rock, Sergeant Rock. Constantly on the front lines, Easy Company was continually getting reinforcements to keep it at fighting strength. And why did they call him the Rock? Because when the going gets so rugged that only a rock could stand, Sergeant Rock stands. One day a seasoned vet of the war joined the company, Joe Wall. He was brash, and he was a big man, bigger than the sergeant himself. Wall remarks that the sergeant doesn't look so tough. A comment, if heard by the sergeant, was ignored. The enemy was tough that day, using a tank as a shield to advance on Easy Company, determined to sweep them back into the sea. And it was working. The men of Easy Company could barely peer over their trench to see without getting their heads shaved by machine gun fire. It was then that Joe Wall questioned, what if the tank just squats over us and the infantry rolls pineapples down upon us? If we stop the tank, the infantry will lose their cover. Give me some rapid fire. I'm going out. With that, Wall climbed over the trench under a hail of bullets coming from in front and behind. The men of Easy Company ignored the danger to cover Wall as he crawled through the mud towards the approaching tank. He calmly laid down in front of the metal beast as it approached, knowing that the Nazis behind it could not target him, as long as they used the tank as a shield. Wall primed a few grenades as he realized the fight was now between just him and the machine. The men of Easy Company watched in astonishment as their new member acted like a wall, as if nothing, not even fear, could move him. And as the tank rolled over him, he jammed 2 grenades into its tracks. Knowing that he would be exposed to the Nazi infantry after the tank rolled by, Joe Wall decided to just play dead. One of the Nazis thought the tank had run Joe Wall over, killing him. Another one wanted to be sure, and put the muzzle of his rifle to Wall's face. It was in that moment that the tank exploded. It distracted the Nazis just long enough for Wall to grab the rifle and begin swinging it wildly, beating back the infantry group. All the while, Easy Company continued to witness a man who was immovable, a lone figure standing up against impossible odds. But it was Sergeant Rock who finished off the enemy, blowing the enemy tank with another grenade. The men of Easy Company continued to be in awe of their new member, and now they announced they had a Rock and a Wall. For Joe Wall, he still looked at Sergeant Rock and again commented that he didn't look so tough. But again, Sergeant Rock said nothing. A few days later, a flying fortress made an emergency landing in front of Easy Company. The crew was in obvious need of help. As Easy Company made their way to it, mortar fire began to explode all around them. Sergeant Rock ordered his men to get back before the enemy could zero in on their position and prepare for the counterattack. As the men fell back, Sergeant Rock ran towards the plane. But the mortar blasts were not targeting the plane specifically. It was obvious the Nazis wanted the crew alive. And as fire and shrapnel stormed around them, the sergeant realized he was not alone. The Wall was keeping pace with him. The sergeant questioned him as they ran. He thought he told everyone to get back, but the wall answered that he couldn't hear a thing he was saying with all these eggshells being tossed at them. Just as the two reached the grounded plane, the pilot called out to them. They had made their repairs, and they were ready to fly again, and they still had an A1 target to reach, but they had no one to man the guns. The wall answered that he couldn't speak for the sergeant, but Guns is his middle name. The two men climbed into the flying fortress and manned the 50 cals, the wall still making jokes about being bigger than his sergeant. As soon as they were in the air again, Joe Wall opened fire on an armored car the Nazis had sent out to stop the fortress, all the while still trash-talking his sergeant. 30 minutes later, the fortress was over its intended target, a rocket-launching platform. They needed to go in low to make sure they got everything in one pass. The pilot didn't need to say anything to the wall. He was already blasting away at enemy fighters, and still talking smack to the Rock. "Just shoo these chickens around to my side, Sarge. I'll take care of them," Wall shouted. Suddenly, the wall was hit. He could no longer lift his arms to fire his weapon, and an enemy fighter was bearing down on them. Sergeant Rock said nothing as he leapt from the other side, manned Wall's 50 caliber gun, and tracked the enemy fighter, putting it down. And Sergeant Rock continued to be silent as he bounced from one side of the fortress to the other, from gun to gun, firing at anything that came close. Meanwhile, the wall was in despair. What kind of soldier was he? He couldn't do a thing to help. Then, after the main target was destroyed, one last fighter bore down on the fortress, determined to blow it out of the sky. Sergeant Rock quietly lifted the wall up and helped him to his gun. He positioned Joe Wall just right to fire the weapon, which Wall could not understand. The two men fired the weapon together, blasting the enemy plane into pieces. Wall congratulated the sergeant. They were able to defeat the enemy and finish the mission only because the sergeant didn't budge. Weeks later, as new recruits came up to Easy Company, they would ask Joe Wall why they call the sergeant the Rock of Easy Company. His answer? Because a wall may fall, Buster, but not a rock. Thus ends the first official appearance of Sergeant Rock of Easy Company, where nothing is ever easy. Sergeant Rock and Easy Company would go on to have a terrific run in DC Comics, leaving questions and controversy about his ultimate fate as a character due to retcons and retellings of their stories. But 50 years after his debut, DC Comics would publish DC Universe Legacies, issue number 4, and we would finally have an answer to the final fate of Sergeant Rock. The day is July 4th, 1976, America's bicentennial. Bill Storm, a World War II vet, a former PT boat skipper, and a member of the elite squadron called the Losers, is surprised he made it this far, that he had survived to see this day. Now he spends most of his time working for the Bureau of Disabled Veterans Affairs. Although he doesn't travel much these days, he would not have missed this gathering in New York City for anything. As he enters the barracks lounge, he is greeted by his old team. They're all there. Shouldn't have questioned their appearance at all. After all, there's no other group like this one in the entire world. The bartender offers Bill a drink. Everything's on the house tonight. The gathering of aged warriors catch up. Life has moved on, and they all seem to be doing well. However, there is still one man missing, Sergeant Frank Rock, which seems ironic in the moment. Back in the time, if there was one man everyone thought would make it out alive, everyone would have bet on the Rock. But the way Johnny Cloud, the Native American soldier turned congressman, tells it, Sergeant Rock went out the way he would have wanted to go. It was the last day of the war. Germany had surrendered. But the word had not reached all the troops, so the combat-happy Joes of Easy Company were right where they usually were, in the center of the bullseye. The Krauts had Easy Company pinned down. But soon they had another problem. A little girl had just walked out into the line of fire. It was a miracle that the kid had not been hit yet with all the fire from both sides. But miracles was the sergeant's specialty. One of the younger men asked the sergeant how they were going to save her. The sergeant replied, "You don't do nothing, kid, except lay down covering fire and maybe say a little prayer." Sergeant Frank Rock sprinted across the town square like a wide receiver and scooped up the little girl as if she was a loose football. But it came at a cost. The sergeant was hit multiple times. And then, just like that, the shooting stopped. The Germans had finally gotten word of the armistice, but it was too late. The men of Easy Company gathered around their fallen sergeant in disbelief that the Rock had fallen, killed on the last day of the war by the final bullets fired in a years-long conflict. Back in 1976, a woman enters the bar as the remaining men of Easy Company and the losers remember that final day. She mockingly asks if this is just a boys' club or can anybody join, and her timing is perfect. French Ambassador Sabine Roth, otherwise known as Mademoiselle Marie, a member of the French underground resistance during the Nazi occupation of France, surprises all the men, who invite her to join in a toast to the memory of Sergeant Rock. After the toast, the men ask Marie to join them for dinner, but she has to decline. She is meeting her son for dinner. He is on leave, and she doesn't get to see him very often. Just then, her son walks in. He removes his cap and tells the men that it is an honor to meet them all. He takes his mom by the arm and escorts her out the door as they all exchange goodbyes. The men are left stunned at the appearance of Marie's son. He is the spitting image of Sergeant Frank Rock, and although they cannot be sure, there is little doubt in their minds. One of the men then realizes that there is one other soldier missing from the group, the one known as the Unknown Soldier, a soldier who always covered his face, an expert in disguise and infiltration. You'd think he'd want to be here for this celebration. Just then, Johnny Cloud looks down at the bar to see a mask and a pair of glasses. The mask is that of the face of the bartender who had been serving drinks all night long. It is then they realize that even the Unknown Soldier couldn't stay away from America's 200th birthday bash. God bless America. Thus ends the story of Sergeant Frank Rock, the Rock of Easy Company. I hope you enjoyed this look back at this piece of comic book Americana. If you want more comic book fun, click on the thumbnail at the end of the video for our look back at the first ever appearance of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, in the 3-issue story arc beginning with the Amazing Spider-Man number 50 titled Spider-Man No More. Thank you for watching. Remember, I'm still your reluctant gringo from somewhere south of the border. Salut and a huevo.